Well, hello. Hey, welcome. Thanks for taking a few minutes to join in and connect with us here at Upper House. We have some really exciting news today, and I have a colleague here, Dan Hummel, who's with us to talk all about what we are doing and the launching of a brand new thing. So, Dan, do you want to give us a little insight to what we're launching today at Upper House?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. We're excited that today is our first episode of our new podcast called the UpWords Podcast. This is the first podcast that Upper House has done in its 6-year history. It's been in the works for a while, but particularly with this season that we're in, where we can't gather as much in person. And yet we have so many great connections at Upper House, so many great speakers and experts that are already doing events with us. We're looking for new ways to share their insights with our community here in Madison, first and foremost, but also through the miracle of podcasting beyond. So the podcast is part of the broader way we think about programming here at Upper House. We have a passion for connecting faith with ideas, for integrating our vocations with our Christian faith as well. And so that's who we have speak here at Upper House and give talks and seminars and other things when we can do those in person or through live events. And we hope to continue that on the podcast, but maybe have slightly different conversations with some of the biographies of the speakers, some of their background, and some of the things that you might not get to know about someone if you just attend one of their talks or presentations. And the last thing I'll say is we love being diverse in the topics that we talk about here at Upper House and in the areas of life and faith that we talk about. So some of the areas that we'll be talking about on the podcast include history, which is my favorite as a historian, but also theology and formation and campus life here at UW and leadership and science and technology and how those intersect with faith, all different types of topics. And we'll be bringing in experts and leaders and thinkers who can speak on those topics.
Great. So why get into the podcast space? I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but I think there's a renaissance of podcasting, and there's a lot of people who have been launching a podcast over these months. So, what will kind of guests find kind of unique about our voice, kind of in this space, and maybe the types of kind of podcast episodes that people could be thinking about that maybe landing in their feed coming up.
Yeah, and you're so right. We've you and I have been working on this for months now. We've been joking that this would be really trendy in like 2012, and we're here in 2020. I think part of it is what I mentioned about the need in this COVID season to connect with people and being unable to do that in the way that Upper House is really. That we've really done for a long time and we're really good at is in-person gathering and bringing people into our space here at UW-Madison and, giving people the hospitality that we love doing so much. And we can't do that now. So that's one sort of maybe push factor that's pushing us to think about how we can be more creative and dynamic in our programming. I'd also say that I know you are, I am, there's a number of people on our team who are avid podcast listeners, and it's definitely, it's the radio of this century. It's a way to have deep conversations, uninterrupted conversations that is very convenient to listen to, obviously, if you're on the listening end. And we love having deep, long conversations here at Upper House about topics that require that type of attention and a real space for people to explain their ideas, explain where they're coming from. And so it just made sense that this is the right format, this is the right medium to think about all the great programming we do in a slightly different context. And so one of the exciting things about the UpWords podcast is that it won't just be me hosting it. I am hosting the first episode, but we're going to have multiple people on our team hosting and we have a great team here. There's a lot of expertise. There's a lot of diverse interests on the team. And so we'll be having, alongside all those diverse types of topics, we'll be having most of the people from our team at some point or another will be leading the conversations, the interviews mostly, but we'll also be pulling out some of our classic talks here if they somehow connect to contemporary events or some type of topic that we've talked a lot about here. You can also expect to find episodes that link up with speakers that we have coming in to our programming that's still going to continue, just like it always has. But this will be sort of one extra thing that we do with some of the speakers to get, again, a different side of who they are and maybe dive deeper on parts of who they are and what they bring to the conversations that we want to have that isn't covered in their presentations. And then finally, one thing we hope to do with some of the episodes is give listeners a little behind the scenes of how Upper House works. We have a ton of people who know who we are here in Madison. And I know there's interest out there for just understanding how we choose who to bring here, how we keep our space full all the time, and the sort of the hospitality thinking that goes into that. And then we just have interesting people on our team. So some of the episodes will also just be focused on what's happening here at Upper House, what you can expect coming up, and actually how we make decisions behind the scenes.
Awesome. Well, we had the real honor and to work with some local people to kind of produce this podcast. So maybe take us a little insider on who are some of the local people. We had this great graphic for our podcast, and we didn't do that as an Upper House team. We had a friend of Upper House help us with that. So take us through some of the local talent that we've used to kind of help produce some of these things.
Yeah, this was one of the sort of values we had going into this whole project was we have such talented artists and audio engineers and others, all the different parts of a podcast. If you think about all the different pieces that have to go into it, we have those locally here at UW, in the local Christian communities around Madison. We have the headquarters of a number of Christian organizations here in town. And so we decided we wanted to do as much of it in-house, or not in-house, but in Madison as we could with the people we already know. And so that graphic that you see, which is a great sort of mix of our colors that we use all the time here at Upper House, is made by Madeline Ramsey, who's someone we're working newly with, but she's here in Madison. When you turn on an episode, we have music that we created specifically for the podcast, and that was made by Micah Bear, who's a local musician. He works at Geneva Campus Church just down the street here from us, and Mike has done work with Upper House before. He's one of our favorite musicians to partner with, and it was a real joy to give him just sort of really broad outlines about how we were thinking about the podcast, and then him coming up with a bunch of different interesting music that reflects sort of Upper House's values and what we're trying to get out of the podcast. And then finally, we don't have a full podcast studio sort of set up here at Upper House, and so we do need audio editing to make this a really professional sounding product. And so we're actually using our very own Dan Johnson's brother, Andy, who's done audio engineering in Madison for a while now. He is editing each of our podcasts. And so as much as we can in the future, as we hopefully expand, continue the podcast and even maybe iterate on it in different ways, we're hoping to be able to continue to just use partners here in Madison and sort of elevate some of those people as much as we can, because we love their work so much, and we find it a little more meaningful, I guess, that it is made here all in Madison.
Awesome. So wanted to kind of just give you guys a little insider information into the first couple episodes that are launching here, and so I'm going to let Dan talk about kind of the two first speakers and people that we're interviewing for the podcast here, and then we'll bring it back and kind of do a final wrap here.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, the first episode is out today, and it's with Darren Dochuk, one of my favorite historians of American religion. Darren actually visited Upper House in February of this year, which is when we did a bunch of events with him, knowing that we were already sort of thinking about a podcast at that time. And knowing that, I sat down with Darren for about an hour and talked about sort of parts of his life that I didn't know much about. I've read all of his books and many of his articles, but sort of his formation as a historian, going all the way back to his childhood, some of the background on his big arguments that he makes about American evangelicalism in the 20th century and its connection to economic history, connection to energy history in his new book about the oil industry and Christianity. And then we end talking about the implications of his work for a Christian audience, knowing that he was coming to Upper House, he was prepared to talk about that as well. And so that's the first episode, and that's a very good indicator of the type of conversation that we'll have, particularly when it's a historian. But the second episode, which I should mention, we're going to be doing 2 a month for now, and then as we ramp up, that might change. But for now, we'll be releasing on the first and third Mondays of every month. The second episode is with Marilyn McIntyre, who just visited here, did a bunch of virtual events here last week. And Marilyn is a medical humanities professor, and she has a very long list of books she's written, of articles she's written, of classes she's taught. And so my colleague Melissa, who was sort of the person that produced those events with Marilyn, sat down with her and talked about her long history of teaching writing, of being a Christian writer, and of writing about topics that are sort of outside of her immediate area of expertise in the medical world. So that'll be our second episode later in November. And these should just be an indication of the types of conversations we're looking for. Future episodes will include looking at some of the different events that we are doing right now here at Upper House around different theological themes. And we're always looking for new interviews to have, in particular, people who sort of embody the areas of interest that Upper House is already programming in.
Well, that's great. We're definitely looking for those 2 first episodes coming down the pipeline here, and really grateful for our team that's been behind the scenes working on this for a number of months. And this is a fun day a release day, a launch day for it. So, which is really, really good. So, we're going to continue doing our virtual events in this space. So you can look at our, website and our calendar for all of those. So upperhouse.org/events for those. How does this podcast fit in kind of the wide variety of different offerings that we're having here at Upper House? And then we'll give some folks some information how they can get connected and subscribe.
Yeah, so if you know Upper House, you've noticed that we've had to adapt in this season to offering different types of programs and groups. And if you're not familiar with Upper House, you'll notice if you go on our website that we are doing a lot more small group gatherings or groups that meet more than once. And that's in part just to adapt to the season, but also it's pretty exciting. There's a lot of interesting conversations that are happening, relationships being made, and topics being discussed that might not be discussed if we were in our normal model of a semester. And so, podcasting is a new way of doing that. I tend to love listening to podcasts because there is, much like the radio was for previous generations, and still, many people listen to radio. There's sort of an intimacy that is built between the host and the guest and the listener. And particularly if you have headphones in, you really can feel like you're listening in on a conversation, two people just talking together. And so that's a type of interaction that you wouldn't get at an Upper House big event. That's meant, there's other things happening at one of our normal large events. And so we're thinking of this as just one more way to bring really deep reflection and sort of intimate connection in a season when it might be hard to feel that way, through the conversations we're having. And I should mention too that we're totally open to hearing from listeners about how the podcast is going, any suggestions you might have. And so that can happen by just emailing podcast@slbrownfoundation.org. The Stephen Malloy Brown Foundation is what funds Upper House. And so again, that's podcast@slbrownfoundation.org. And then the last thing I'll say is just pointing you to where you can find the podcast and subscribe. If you go onto our website, upperhouse.org, and go to UpWords and then go to the podcast page, that'll take you to the landing page if you want to listen to it on your web browser. It's also on basically every major podcast platform. So Spotify or Apple, or I happen to use Overcast. Any of those, you can just search for the UpWords podcast and you can subscribe to it there. So again, feel free to reach out and let us know how it's going. We, with our events, we always get these like feedback forms that people can fill out. We don't have one of those for podcasts for obvious reasons. It doesn't make as much sense, but we'd love to hear how it's going. And I can, sort of look on the numbers and see how many people are listening, but that's only one metric. And we'd love to hear from people how the interviews are landing and what we can do better as we continue to grow this new initiative over the coming months.
Good. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for jumping on here with me. This is really fun to kind of get the word out on another space to do that. I know we had sent the newsletter out, and it's been all over social media for the last couple of days. So we would love for you guys to connect with UpWords Podcast at Upper House. And thank you for Dan. Dan's leading this on our team, and we're so grateful for his leadership there as well. For this brand new initiative that we have that's launching today. So today's is Darren Docek. You can go check that out on any podcast application. Just search UpWords, and I'm sure it will pop up in your feed. And then 2 weeks from today, we can look for that from Marilyn McIntyre, episode number 2. So, and you can look at those the first and the third Mondays of every month from now until we probably add some more. So
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, good. Well, anything else, Dan, you want to say to folks about the launch of this podcast initiative that we have as we exit out here?
The last thing I'll say, which I hear on podcasts all the time, and we actually don't do this in our podcast, but if you want to rate it, feel free to rate it 5 stars as well, because that's always helpful. And we really, our first audience for this is the Madison audience that we are already serving, but we'd love to find new people I can already see there are people across the country that have subscribed, but we'd love to find more, and those ratings really help and sort of bump it up on the various metrics that Apple and Spotify use. So yeah, go out there and listen to it first. Don't just give it a blind 5, but if you like it, give it a 5 rating, and that'll help us too.
Good. Well, great. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in quick here on this Monday as we launch this really fun new initiative here at Upper House. We're so grateful that everyone can continue to connect with us, even in this virtual space that we're in. And we're so grateful for everyone that's jumping in here in partnership with us. So have a great day, friends.